African woman marries Arab executive in exchange for eye surgery, then shocked everyone. She agreed to marry a billionaire in exchange for the chance to see again. But what she discovered left everyone speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible stories like this. Now let's dive into this unbelievable story. The heavy scent of rain clung to the warm African air as Amina Diallo sat by the window, tracing invisible patterns on the wooden frame. She had never seen the sky, never witnessed the vibrant landscapes her country was famous for. Born blind, she had learned to navigate the world through sound, touch, and the vivid descriptions of those around her. But her life had never been easy. Amina had grown up in Senegal, where opportunities for someone like her were scarce. Despite her intelligence and resilience, the weight of her condition had limited her in ways she refused to admit. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother, a seamstress, worked tirelessly to provide for them. But no matter how much effort they put in, poverty was a constant shadow in their lives. Then came an offer that could change everything, a chance to see for the first time. The proposal had come from a man she had never met, Zade al-Mansour, a wealthy Arab executive from Dubai. He was powerful, intimidatingly rich, and known for being ruthless in business. His name carried weight in the world of luxury hotels, oil investments, and high-stakes negotiations. To many, he was untouchable. When his assistant contacted Amina's family with the proposition, they were in shock. Marry him, and he will pay for the most advanced eye surgery in the world. It sounded like a fairy tale, something straight out of a storybook. But it wasn't fantasy. It was reality, and it came with a price. Amina sat with her mother that night, her heart pounding. "Do you truly believe this man will change your life?" her mother asked, voice heavy with worry. Amina didn't hesitate. "If there's even a chance, I have to take it." Her mother sighed, but there was something unspoken in the air, the desperation, the longing. Amina had spent her entire life in darkness, and now she was being offered the impossible. The decision was made. A week later, Amina stood at the airport, clutching her mother's hand as a team of well-dressed assistants guided her onto a private jet to Dubai. The air was different, cold, sterile, luxurious in ways she had never imagined. She could hear the rustle of expensive fabrics, the soft murmur of voices speaking in Arabic, and the hum of an aircraft unlike any she had ever been on. She was stepping into a world of unimaginable wealth, but what awaited her there was something she never could have predicted. The hum of the jet was steady, almost hypnotic, but Amina couldn't relax. The soft leather of the seat beneath her was smoother than anything she had ever touched. The air inside the plane filled with a subtle, expensive cologne that lingered in every breath she took. She held her hands tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting together as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She was on a private jet, flying to Dubai, to marry a man she had never met. It didn't feel real. The sound of footsteps made her sit up straighter. A deep, authoritative voice spoke in Arabic, followed by the polite murmur of an assistant. Then, the air shifted. Someone was standing close. "Miss Diallo," a new voice said, rich and smooth, with the faintest hint of an accent. "Welcome." Amina's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen a man before, but something about his presence felt overwhelming. It wasn't just the weight of his voice. It was the quiet power beneath it. "Mr. Al-Mansour?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves tightening in her stomach. A pause. Then, "Yes." He was so close that she could feel the warmth of his body, He smelled like leather, spice, and something sharp. Something undeniably expensive. Amina's fingers clenched around the armrest. "I assume my assistant explained the terms of our arrangement," he said, his tone unreadable. She nodded. "He did." "And you agreed?" Another nod. "I did." Silence stretched between them. Then Zade exhaled slowly. "Good." She felt him step back. The air around her shifted again, and for the first time, Amina realized something. This wasn't just business for him. There was something else. Something unspoken. The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. Amina pretended to sleep, but her mind was racing. What kind of man was she about to marry? Why had he chosen her? And more importantly, what was he hiding? The moment the plane touched down in Dubai, Amina's heart pounded against her ribs. The air inside the jet felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. She had spent the last few hours listening to the hum of the engines, feeling every small movement of the aircraft, but nothing could prepare her for what was waiting outside. A hand gently touched her elbow. "We have arrived, Miss Diallo," the soft voice of a female assistant informed her. Amina swallowed and nodded. She wanted to appear calm, but the truth was, her mind was racing. She was about to step into a world completely foreign to her, a life where wealth and power dictated everything. And at the center of it was Zade al-Mansour, the man she had agreed to marry. The sound of the aircraft door opening was followed by a gust of warm, dry air rushing in. Even without sight, she could feel the vastness of the place. The heat wrapped around her, making her skin prickle. Voices murmured in Arabic, the tone of respect clear, and then she heard his voice. "Come." One word, deep, commanding, the kind of voice that expected obedience. Amina tensed for a second before she stepped forward, her movements careful as she followed the sound. A new hand replaced the assistant's, a firm, confident grip on her wrist. Zade. His touch was warm, solid, not hesitant, not searching, just certain. "This way." She let him guide her down the steps. Each step felt like a threshold she was crossing, leaving behind the life she had known, stepping into something unknown. The ground beneath her was smooth, and the heat of the sun on her skin told her they were outside. Then came the scent, clean, rich with something floral, yet sharp. It smelled expensive, like marble floors and new leather. A car. Amina barely had time to process it before Zade helped her into what felt like the smoothest, softest seat she had ever sat in. The door closed beside her with a quiet thud, sealing her inside a bubble of silence and chilled air. The car smelled like him. Masculine. Controlled. A second later, the vehicle moved, gliding forward with barely a sound. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched between them, filled only by the faint hum of the city beyond the tinted windows. Finally, Zade broke the silence. "You have questions." Amina turned her head slightly in his direction. "I do. Ask." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Why me?" A pause. Then, "Because you needed me as much as I needed you." His answer was cryptic, offering no real insight. But there was a weight behind it that made her shiver. "What do you need me for?" Another pause, this one longer. Then finally, he said, "You'll find out soon enough." Amina's fingers clenched in her lap. The more he spoke, the more she felt like she was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. She changed her approach. Why would a man like you, someone with everything, offer marriage to a woman he's never met? This time, he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Because some things money can't buy. Amina frowned. She wanted to ask more, but something about his tone stopped her. The rest of the drive continued in silence. Then the car slowed, turned, and came to a smooth stop. "We're here," Zade said. Amina heard the door open, then felt his hand on hers again, guiding her out of the car. She stepped onto a cool, polished surface, marble maybe, and the air changed, no longer hot and dry but cool, filled with the faint scent of jasmine. Then she heard it, the soft echo of an enormous space. Zade's home. Or rather, her new home. She barely had time to process it before he spoke again. "You must be tired. I'll have my staff show you to your room." Amina turned toward him, instinctively reaching out. Her fingers brushed against the fabric of his sleeve, rich, smooth, finely tailored. "Wait," she said. He stilled. She took a breath. "Tell me something real, Zade. Not another vague answer." Silence. Then, after what felt like forever, he exhaled. "I don't sleep much," he admitted. "Too many ghosts." Amina's pulse jumped. "Ghosts?" He didn't elaborate. Instead, he gently untangled her fingers from his sleeve. "Rest now. You'll need it." And just like that, he was gone. Leaving her standing in the middle of a palace she couldn't see, surrounded by a life she didn't understand, with a husband who was still very much a stranger. And the only thing she knew for sure was that Zade al-Mansur had secrets. Amina sat on the edge of the massive bed, running her fingers over the silky sheets beneath her. Everything around her felt extravagant, too perfect, too polished. The air in the room was crisp, scented faintly with jasmine and something else she couldn't place. It was luxurious, but it didn't feel hers. She was in Dubai, married, living in a palace, and yet she had never felt more like a stranger. A soft knock on the door made her flinch. Before she could respond, a woman's voice, warm but professional, called out, "Madam, would you like some tea before bed?" Amina hesitated. "Madam." The word felt strange on her lips. "Yes, please," she said after a moment. A quiet shuffle followed, then the sound of porcelain clinking as the tea was placed on a small table near her bed. "Do you need anything else, madam?" Amina shook her head. "No, thank you." The woman left as silently as she had come. Amina reached for the tea, letting her fingers brush against the delicate cup. It was warm, comforting. She took a slow sip, savoring the subtle floral taste. Then, she sat there in the dark, listening to the silence. Somewhere in this vast mansion, her husband was awake. She knew because she could feel it. Zade had told her he didn't sleep much. Too many ghosts, he had said. What did that mean? What haunted a man who had everything? Amina didn't know, but she had the distinct feeling that whatever it was, it had something to do with why she was here. Her fingers tightened around the cup. She would find out. The next morning, Amina woke to the sound of birds chirping just beyond her window. She stretched, feeling the cool air against her skin. It took a moment for her to remember where she was, to remember everything. Then the soft shuffle of footsteps caught her attention. "Good morning, madam," the same voice from the night before greeted her. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are." Amina nodded, pushing herself up. Thank you. I'll be down shortly. After freshening up, she was led through a maze of hallways, guided by the familiar scent of coffee and fresh bread. When they finally reached the dining area, she could hear the clinking of silverware, the faint rustle of a newspaper, and then his voice. Sleep well? Zade. He was here. Amina took a slow breath before nodding. Yes. She felt for the chair in front of her, and before she could sit, she felt his presence shift. A hand, firm, steady, rested against the back of the chair, guiding her. She swallowed hard as she sat down. Thank you. Zade didn't respond immediately. Instead, the rustling of the newspaper stopped, and she could feel his gaze on her. You're adjusting quickly, he noted. Amina's fingers found the edge of the napkin beside her plate. Would you prefer if I didn't? Silence. Then, a quiet chuckle. Not at all. She heard him take a sip of his coffee. The tension between them was thick, unspoken. Amina decided to push. Tell me about your ghosts, she said suddenly. The air shifted. She didn't need to see his face to know she had caught him off guard. Zade didn't speak right away. Then, finally, he exhaled. You're bold. Amina lifted her chin slightly. I have to be. More silence. Then, just when she thought he wouldn't answer, he said, I once loved someone, and I lost her. Amina's breath hitched. Before she could respond, Zade stood. That's all you'll get for now, he murmured, his voice unreadable. Finish your breakfast, Amina. And just like that, he walked away, leaving Amina with more questions than ever. Amina sat frozen at the dining table long after Zade had left. His words echoed in her mind. I once loved someone, and I lost her. There was pain in his voice, pain buried so deep it barely cracked the surface, but she had felt it. Even without sight, she could recognize grief when she heard it. She pressed her fingers against the cool porcelain of her teacup, trying to steady her thoughts. What had happened to him? Who was she? And why did Amina have the unsettling feeling that she was stepping into a story much bigger than herself? She took a slow sip of her tea, forcing herself to focus. If she was going to survive in this world, a world of wealth, power, and unspoken rules, she needed to understand the man she had married, and she needed to start now. Later that afternoon, Amina found herself being led through the estate. The mansion was massive, far larger than she had imagined. Every step she took was met with the quiet hush of marble floors, the faint scent of jasmine trailing through the hallways. Where are we going? She asked, the assistant guiding her. The library, madam. Library. She wasn't expecting that. When they entered, she felt the immediate change in the air. The scent of old books, the faint scratch of a pen against paper. Someone was inside. Zade. Amina didn't need to be told. The assistant left them alone, and Amina waited. She could hear the faint rustle of papers, the slow inhale of someone deep in thought. Finally, she spoke. Do you always disappear after dropping dramatic confessions at breakfast? A brief silence, then a low chuckle. I suppose I do, Zade admitted. Amina took a few careful steps forward, running her fingers along the edge of what she assumed was a desk. Then tell me the rest. She heard him shift. And why should I? Because I'm your wife, she said simply. Silence stretched between them. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Zade exhaled. Her name was Layla, he said quietly. Amina's chest tightened. She was the only person who ever saw me for more than my money, my power. She wasn't afraid of me. Amina swallowed. And? Zade's voice turned distant. And she died. The weight of those words pressed against the air between them. Amina felt her fingers tighten on the desk. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Zade let out a slow breath. "It was a long time ago. But you still think about her?" He didn't answer. Amina took a step closer. "Why me, Zade?" He finally looked up. Even without sight, she could feel his gaze on her. "Because I needed to marry someone who wouldn't want more from me than what I offered," he said. "And because I knew you understood what it meant to be trapped in a life you didn't choose." Amina's breath caught. Trapped. Was that what she was? Or was it what he was? She took a slow step back, nodding once. "Thank you for telling me." Zade didn't respond. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, he spoke again. "Amina." She paused. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for this arrangement," he said quietly, "but I will keep my promise." She clenched her hands at her sides. "I know." And then she walked away. But deep down, she knew this was far from over. The next morning, Amina woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. Something had shifted, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Zade's confession the day before lingered in her mind. He wasn't the cold, emotionless man she had imagined when she first agreed to this marriage. He was complicated, layered, and he was still grieving. But that didn't change the fact that their arrangement was built on a fragile foundation. An exchange, nothing more. Or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. As she dressed for the day, she heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and the same assistant from before stepped inside. "Madame, Mr. Al-Mansour has requested your presence in the garden." Amina frowned. The garden? She hadn't expected that. "All right," she said, smoothing down her dress. "Take me there." The walk to the garden was quiet, but Amina could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin as they stepped outside. The scent of roses and jasmine filled the air, and the distant hum of birds made the space feel peaceful. And then she heard him. "Amina." His voice was softer than usual, almost gentle. She turned toward the sound, her heart racing for reasons she didn't fully understand. Zade. She felt him approach, his footsteps measured and deliberate. When he stopped in front of her, she could feel the heat of his body, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. "I wanted to show you something," he said. Amina tilted her head. "What is it?" Without a word, he took her hand. His grip was firm but careful, as if he was afraid of breaking her. Slowly, he guided her forward, step by step, until they stopped. "Here," he said softly. Amina felt her hand brush against something cool and rough. She traced her fingers along the surface, realizing it was a stone bench. Zade gently guided her to sit down, and she heard the rustling of leaves nearby. "What is this place?" she asked. "It's my mother's garden," Zade said quietly. "She planted it before she died. I come here when I need to think." Amina's throat tightened. She could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the way his words carried a weight he rarely showed. "Why did you bring me here?" Zade hesitated. Then he said, "Because I want you to understand something." Amina waited, her heart pounding. I didn't marry you just to fulfill a deal, he said. I married you because I saw something in you. Strength, resilience. The same things I've spent my whole life chasing. Amina's breath caught. I don't expect you to love me, Zade continued, but I want you to know that you're not just here for surgery. You're here because I needed you. The honesty in his words left her stunned. For the first time, she realized that Zade wasn't as untouchable as he seemed. He was broken, just like her. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm. He didn't pull away. Maybe we both needed each other, she said softly. Zade didn't answer, but she felt the tension in his body ease slightly. They sat there in silence, the garden wrapping around them like a protective cocoon. For the first time since she arrived in Dubai, Amina felt like she wasn't alone. That evening, as Amina lay in bed, her mind was racing. Zade's words had changed something between them, but she wasn't sure what it meant. Was this still just an arrangement, or was it becoming something more? She closed her eyes, letting the questions swirl in her mind. Whatever the answer was, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The night air was cool against Amina's skin as she lay awake in bed, listening to the silence of the mansion. Everything about her life had changed in a matter of days, and yet she still felt like a stranger in this place. Her conversation with Zade in the garden had been unexpected. He had let his guard down, if only for a moment, and for the first time, she had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the power and wealth. But what did it mean? Was he starting to care for her, or was she simply reading too much into his words? She sighed, rolling onto her side. She needed to stop thinking so much. Tomorrow, she would focus on what truly mattered, her surgery. The very reason she had agreed to this marriage in the first place. As she drifted into a light sleep, a distant sound echoed through the halls. A door closing, heavy footsteps. Then, silence. She tensed. Someone was awake. Amina sat up, her pulse quickening. She had learned the rhythm of this house, the way the staff moved, the quiet efficiency of their steps. But this was Zade. She could feel it. Throwing the covers aside, she stood up and carefully made her way toward the door. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The air was still. Then she heard it again, the faint sound of movement coming from downstairs. She followed the sound, careful with each step, her hands brushing against the cool walls for guidance. When she reached the bottom of the staircase, she paused. Zade? Silence. Then a low sigh. You shouldn't be wandering around this late. His voice was close, closer than she expected. She turned her head slightly, trying to place him. Neither should you. He let out a quiet chuckle. Fair enough. Amina took a step forward. Why are you awake? A pause. Then, because I don't sleep much. She frowned. You said that before, but you never told me why. Silence stretched between them. Then slowly she heard him move closer. I have nightmares, he admitted. Amina's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to answer so honestly. What kind of nightmares? She asked softly. She felt his hesitation in the air, the way he took a slow breath before speaking. Ones I don't talk about. She nodded, understanding. Does it have to do with Layla? His body tensed. Even without sight, she could feel it. Then, finally, he said, "Yes." Amina swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "Do you ever talk about her?" "No." "Maybe you should." He let out a slow exhale. "Maybe." For a moment, they just stood there in the dark, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Then, he did something unexpected. He reached for her hand. His touch was warm, steady, not demanding, not hesitant. Just there. Amina's breath hitched. This wasn't part of the arrangement. This wasn't part of the deal. But as his fingers brushed against hers, she realized something. Maybe she didn't care. Maybe for the first time since stepping into this new life, she didn't feel so alone. And maybe, just maybe, neither did he. The morning of Amina's surgery arrived faster than she expected. She sat quietly in the back seat of the car as Zade drove her to the private hospital. His presence was steady, his usual confidence unwavering, but she could sense something different in him today. "You're nervous," she said softly. He exhaled. "I don't like hospitals." She turned her head toward him. "Because of her?" A long pause. Then, "Yes." Amina reached for his hand without thinking. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. For the first time, she felt that this was no longer just a transaction. The bright lights of the operating room were overwhelming. Amina took a deep breath as the doctors explained the procedure one last time. It was risky, but it was her only chance to see. She thought of Zade, of his voice, his touch, the way he had started to care. Was she ready for what came next? As the anesthesia pulled her under, one final thought whispered through her mind. Would Zade still look at her the same way once she opened her eyes?